Hey there, and welcome to the next video in our Intro to Web Dev series. At this point, you would have learned the fundamentals of HTML and CSS and the fundamentals of JavaScript as well. So you know how to write code, specifically JavaScript code that does stuff like interact with the page to do like DOM manipulation. You've seen like if statements and for loops and arrays. And we're going to build on that to learn about JavaScript libraries, which let you kind of take your code to the next level by kind of reusing code that other people have already written. So before we get into all of that, I'm going to start with some starter code just to kind of orient ourselves. So I have just kind of a scratch directory. I've just called it my page on my desktop. With some files. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about that because hopefully by now you have your own HTML and JavaScript files and whatnot. So I'm going to open this up in Atom. Again, doesn't matter what text editor you use, or if you use like an online editor like Replit, it is all good. But I'm going to use Atom here. And okay, so I've got my index page, I've got my script.js file, and I've got a styles.css file as well, although I probably won't touch that too much in this video. Okay, so I've got my editor open. Now I'm going to open up my browser. And so I have my browser on the right and my content on the left. Cool. Okay, so right now the code just contains a single P element that says this is my amazing website, and then the body on load attribute calls the load function. And if I go, whoops, I didn't want that file. If I go to the script.js file, then the load function prints hello world to the console. Okay, so there's my amazing website, there's the content, and if I open up the JavaScript console, there's my hello world. Okay, cool. So before I start talking about libraries, or in order to talk about libraries, first I want to talk about kind of the fundamentals of JavaScript and how these files kind of fit together. So in my index.html file, I have this tag. This is an HTML tag with a source attribute. It's a script tag with a source attribute that points to a file called script.js. And this file is right next to the index.html file in this case, so they're neighbors or siblings. And this line of code tells the browser to load the script.js file and run any code in there. In this case, the code simply defines a load function, which doesn't actually, it's not actually called yet, but then when we get to the onload function, then we call the load function. Okay, this could be like an on-click function or something, but we call it onload. Okay, whatever. So that's all good, and I could, maybe modify my JavaScript a little bit and my HTML a little bit to say like maybe I have a div, and I'll give it an ID of like content or something. And for now it'll be blank, or maybe I'll just say like loading to start with. Let me refresh, and I see loading. Okay, cool. And in my load function, maybe what I want to do is, I don't know. I haven't really planned this ahead. Maybe I'm going to create an element. So I'll say something like, let my element equals document.create element, and maybe I'll make a p tag. And then I'll say my element dot inner text. It's a little bigger. Inner text equals hello world, something like this, just for starting out. And then maybe what else I'll do is maybe I'll add it to my my content, right? So ID content div equals and content element equals document.get element by ID, and I called it content, and then I can say something like content element dot append child my element, right? Okay, so let's refresh and see what that does. Refresh, and it says hello world here because I've added that child. Maybe I'll get rid of that loading actually, because I don't think I want that. Fine. So now I have some JavaScript code that creates an element and then adds it to the content div. Okay? And now what if I wanted to do that multiple times, right? So there's a few things I could do, but let's rearrange this just a little bit. Let me put this up top. What I could do is, copy these 3 lines of code and change them and stuff. Or maybe what I'll actually do is maybe I'll refactor it into a function. That sounds better. So maybe I'll say like function add content, and then it's going to take some parameters. I haven't quite figured out what those are yet. And what it's going to do is this logic. So first I'm going to get the content element, and then I'm going to say my element equals, maybe this will be an argument. So I'll say tag, and maybe this will be an argument, text, and so I'll say inner text equals text, and yeah, okay. So now I've refactored my my code so that I have this add content function, which takes 2 parameters, a tag, which can be something like p or h1 or ul or whatever, and then some text. And this function does a few things. First, it gets the content element with the ID of content. Then it creates a new element with that tag, sets the inner text, and then appends the child. So nothing too new, but this now gives us the power to say add content, and I'll say p and hello world again. So nothing should change in my content here. Cool. And now here's the payoff of this refactoring. I can actually call it again. Add content, maybe with h1, and say this is an h1 tag. I'm not being super creative with my example content, but just to get something working. So refresh, and you see that I have repeated my logic, which is in this case, 4 lines of code, so it's not the end of the world, but this could get quite a lot more complicated. But I didn't have to worry about that because it's in its own function here in add content. So all I needed to worry about was calling the add content function and passing it the parameters that will make it do what I want, and there we go. Okay, so hopefully that wasn't too surprising. I'm not sure if you would have seen like the creation of a function with parameters before, but this is building on things that we've seen before. And so to keep going, what I'll say is, I can call this multiple times. So I can say add content. Maybe I have maybe just another H3, this time is an H3 tag, and like this is an H3 tag, whatever. And I'll refresh, and I could keep going. I could go nuts. But what I want to point out next is, so right now all of this is in my script.js file, and that's being loaded here. And that means that when the browser reads this code, it reads the HTML code line by line. Well, I think that's true. Basically, it runs it line by line. And it gets here, and it reads the code that's in the script.js file. And now we have 2 functions defined. We have load and add content defined, which means that at this point in the code, we can actually use those functions. So I'm going to make another script tag. This time it's not going to have a source attribute. It's going to have code inside of it. So what I can say is something like, I don't know, maybe I'll define another function. So maybe I'll say like function add message, whatever. Maybe this one won't take any parameters. And in here, what I'll do is I'll actually call the function that's in my other script.js file, and I'll say add content, and maybe I'll make it I'm running out of HTML tags to use. Maybe I'll just make it a p tag, just whatever, and I'll say message added. Okay, so nothing actually calls this add message function. I could make it the onload function, but whatever. Actually, let me get rid of this maybe. Maybe I'll add a button. So I'll say button, click me, and I'll give the button an onClick attribute of add message. Okay, so now this HTML tag defines a button which has an onClick attribute of add message, which means when I click that button, it'll call the add message function. The add message function is defined in this script tag, and it has an add message function right here, which calls the add content function, which passes it some parameters. But you have to go look in the script.js file to find this add content function. Okay, so that's here, and we created it, so I'm not going to go over it again, but there it is. But this should, fingers crossed, all kind of work. So I'm going to refresh, and I expect to see my content that I had been adding gone because I got rid of my body onload attribute just for testing. And now I'm going to say click me, and I see message added because I added it here. And I'm pointing this out because I want to first show you that you can use a mix of script tags with a source attribute, script tags without a source attribute, and it'll all work fine together. So this lets you kind of split up your code. So what I might do is I'll say that this add content function, maybe this is useful in a bunch of different places, and I actually want to put it somewhere else. And so I'll rename this. Let's see if this is going to get annoying. Behind the scenes stuff. Okay, let me rename this to, I don't know, content tools.js. So now I have a content tools.js file and no longer have a script file. And I'm going to load my content tools.js file here like that. And nothing's changed. Nothing's changed yet. Just the name of the file changed. Let me refresh that and then click me, and okay, cool. Nothing is too different. So yeah, nothing is too different. But what this means is that if I had other HTML files and other script files, I could reference this content tools.js file. I could have referenced it with script.js, but whatever. I'm going to rename it to content tools.js. And now anywhere that I need to use the add content function, I can just remember that I need to first load that file here, and then I can use that function elsewhere. And this doesn't have to be a script file or a script tag that contains code. I could also create a new file. Maybe I'll call it new file. I'll call it message tools.js, whatever. I'm kind of bad at naming things. But let me take this function here, and I'm going to cut it, and I'm going to put it in message tools.js, and I'm going to change this script tag so that now it loads from that file. Source equals message tools.js. Okay, so focusing on the HTML for a second, how this works is, again, the browser reads it kind of line by line, and it gets to this line of code, this HTML tag, this script tag here, and it says, okay, the source is pointed at content-tools.js, so I'm going to go to that file, and I'm going to load all of that code. So it's going to define the load function, it's going to define the add content function. Again, nothing has actually called these functions yet. Then the HTML gets to this script tag, which points to message tools.js, and it goes to that file and loads this this code. In this case, it's just a single function, and that function contains a single line. But here's where it starts to get interesting. The line of code in this file, in this function, is actually defined in the other file. Add content is defined in content tools. But the reason this works is because we've already loaded content-tools.js here. And so this is how you can build up your code in multiple files, and it'll work. As long as you are loading the code before you try to use it. So we have loaded the add content function first before we try to call it. And we load the add message function before we try to call it down here. So now I'm going to save all of this, and I'm going to refresh, and hopefully nothing has changed. And there we go, message added. Okay, all of that was kind of review of what we've seen before, and now we're going to talk about libraries. And the reason I spent so much time reviewing like how JavaScript and HTML and stuff fits together is because, I don't know, drum roll please, here's the core point to understand in order to understand JavaScript libraries. This file name does not have to be a file that you wrote. It can be a file that somebody else wrote. And in a nutshell, a JavaScript library is code that somebody else wrote and they made it available for you to use. It maybe gets a little bit more complicated than that, but honestly, not much more complicated. I think that's a pretty like true definition. JavaScript library means that somebody else or a team of other people wrote some JavaScript code, put it in a JavaScript file, and now you can load that JavaScript file into your HTML, and then you can write JavaScript code that uses the code that they wrote. So you can use functions and variables and stuff that are defined by other people, and that becomes really handy because it means that you are no longer responsible for writing every single line of code that you use. You can use the code that's already out there. So to show sort of why that is useful, let me start over. Honestly, let me start over with some of these files, because these are all just placeholder files. So let me go back to, I don't know, let me call this actually let me create a script.js file, and I'm gonna, maybe I won't delete these files, but I'm gonna close them out and no longer reference them in my HTML. Sure. I'm gonna maybe get rid of some of this stuff. Maybe I'll keep my button actually. Okay, so what I'm going to have is just a single script.js file and a single button. That's all I want. And right now it's going to call add message. Let's change that to like show message. Okay. And in script.js, I'm going to define show message, and I'm going to maybe just call alert hello. Okay. That was kind of a lot of code to write without really thinking too hard about it. So I'm going to refresh and see what broke. Refresh. Nothing seems too broken. Click me. Okay. All right. So I've got a button that when I click that button, it shows this alert that says hello. Okay. And that's, you know, that's all good. It works. And it's code that I wrote. So whatever. That's fine. But let's say that I wanted to make this alert box fancier. And you know, I could do that myself. I could maybe open up a search engine and type like, I don't know, JavaScript alert style box. I don't know, style dialog is maybe what I should have said. Dialog, actually right there, how to change the style of alert box. Let's take a look, and I could look through this and I could do some research, but spoiler alert, it's actually not possible. This alert dialog is I don't know, kind of, I don't know if special is the right word, but it's actually not really part of the web page itself. This is not like HTML content that you define. This is like a system dialog that's being popped up by the browser. So you can't customize it directly. So what you would need to do, and this is pretty much what this is saying, is you would have to like write CSS yourself and maybe pop up a div that has certain styling and its own button, and you could do it. You could do it, and we could do that here, but I don't know how interesting that's going to be. You know, you'd start with like a div that maybe is hidden by default with some CSS, and then you'd show that div when you wanted to show your alert. But that sounds like a lot of work, honestly, and I don't feel like doing it. And this is where the power of JavaScript libraries really starts. So I'm going to go to a search engine, and instead of like trying to figure out how to do it myself, what I'm going to do is I'm going to type into the search box something like JavaScript alert library. And there are a bunch of results. And you can read through them, and you can maybe get a sense of the different things that are available to you. I don't know, I'm going to click one kind of randomly. I haven't planned this part ahead at all. All right, that one looks super annoying, and that looks like it's just clickbait, so I don't trust that. So let's not use that. Yeah, okay, this looks a little bit more promising, a little less annoying. It's just a list of libraries, looks like. Okay. And the first one is Suitealert. Okay. So you could, click through and click around a bunch of them and see which one you like best. I'm just going to click into this first one. I happen to know this one, so I'm kind of cheating a little bit, but whatever. Click around. And this takes me to a GitHub repo, which is the code for the library. All right, cool. And let's see, it's got some like examples, and that's all good. But what I really want is a guide that'll help me like understand like the Hello World version of everything. So let me maybe look at installation. I am not using Node, so I don't think this will work. I am using static HTML, so this script tag will work. And here's where the magic is. This script tag is not like special. It's just a script tag. It's the exact same kind of syntax that we've already used. The only real difference is that it points to a URL, which is on the internet, just like a file on the internet, and the file is like already created and it's already written by other people. So I can actually go to this file. It's going to be really ugly because I can see that it has a min in the file name, but we'll talk about that in a second. So I can just go here, and here's the code for the library. It's super ugly because it's called minifying. The .min part of the file name is a clue that they took the original source code and sent it through actually another computer program, which shortens it. So like if you have a variable called like my element, it'll just shorten it to M, for example. So you see a lot of like one letter variables, and it does a lot of other things to like make the code as small as possible. And this is because you want your sort of files to be really small so that they're faster for the user to download. Anyway, looking at the file won't really tell you much because it's minified, but I don't know, I'm going to try. What happens if I just get rid of that? No. Okay. But since it's on GitHub, you can also sort of peruse it that way if you want to. So I can look through the source, and I can look through like all the different files that it uses. But I don't know, that can be interesting, and it can help you understand how a library works. But part of the beauty of using JavaScript libraries is you don't actually have to care. You don't have to care what the code looks like. You just have to know how to call it. So I wouldn't worry too much about this file name. It can be interesting to look at it, but you don't have to worry about it as long as it's loading the JavaScript into your browser, which, we'll check it in a second, but hopefully it is. So from here, what I need to know is how do I actually use this library? And for that, I'll go back to the guide, which I just found from clicking basically the first couple of links. So I'm going to scroll around, getting started, showing an alert. After importing, you can call the SWAL. I assume that stands for Suitealert. Okay, SWAL function. So let me go to my script.js file. And instead of alert, I'm going to say SWAL, and I have the memory of a goldfish, so I already forgot what it was. It's just SWAL. Oh, cool. All right, so let me save that. Let me save my index.html file, and let me go back to my browser and refresh, and let's just see what broke. Refresh. Okay, I don't have any errors like loading the page, so that's a good sign. So let me say click me, and that's victory. So now my alert is this, relatively beautiful styled box instead of the kind of ugly, boring alert box that you get by default. And you can use your old tricks to see how they do that. You can inspect the element and look at how they're doing it. It's a div with its a bunch of CSS, and it's all HTML and JavaScript. It's all using the tools that you have already learned. But the beauty is that you didn't have to write it, or in this case, I didn't have to write it. But it all works because I am calling, or I'm loading creating a script tag and I'm loading that file, which we looked at before, which is a bunch of code that other people have written. And then in my script.js file, I can call that code. I can use that code. So I can call this function, which it's not a standard JavaScript function. If I don't load that library, I can't just call this random function name. The reason this works is because it is defined somewhere in this file. And that's JavaScript libraries. That's the sort of process that you follow. You identify a need. In my case, it was I want to customize the alert box that pops up. And then you use search engines, honestly. You type JavaScript blank library. In my case, I typed alert library, but if you wanted to do something else, you would use a different keyword here. And then you scroll through the results and get through, some of them are going to be kind of clickbaity, but whatever. Eventually you'll find a list and you can try out different options. In my case, I just tried out the one, but I could go back to that list of multiple libraries and I could try them out. So I don't know what Suitealert 2 is. Maybe it's like the sequel. Maybe it's newer. I don't know what Bootbox is. I've never tried that before. But you click around and you can get a sense of how they are used and what you prefer. So I don't know. I'm not going to do that here, but the process would look the same, and you would choose whichever library kind of fit in your brain the best. But you would look through their documentation and their sort of guides to things like getting started or installation. There's a good keywords to look for if you just want like the hello world version of the library. So from here we could learn more, and let's see. So what are these some other options? So we've got, here's the title and here's the text. So there's a version that looks like 2 parameters. So let's try that actually. Right now I just see hello. Okay. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to maybe just try okay, first of all, hello world. And maybe this is some more text, whatever. Save that and refresh. And I'll click here. And here you go. It says hello world as the title, I guess, and this is some text as the content, and it looks reasonable, and I didn't have to worry about the CSS or anything. And I could keep reading through the different options to see all of the things. Like this looks like it gets pretty fancy, and you can even preview it. That's cool. So this is how you start to build up your web page and using more advanced functionality, without necessarily needing to worry about how that functionality is actually implemented, because you don't have to worry about that. The authors of this library worried about that for you. Okay, so that's JavaScript libraries in a nutshell. I think that's as far as I'm going to go in this video. I think I'll talk about P5 in the next video. P5 happens to be my favorite JavaScript library, but the ideas are the same no matter what JavaScript library you are using. You identify a need that you have. You use a search engine to find libraries that do that thing. You look through documentation to get a sense of the hello world version, and then you build it up from there, getting more and more complicated as you need to. And the beauty of that is you can get all of this cool functionality without worrying about writing all of the code yourself. So in a way, it's like you're not alone in the world anymore. You are now coding alongside other people, even if you've never met them. And I think there's a lot of interesting things in that direction. I think there's a lot of beauty to the open source philosophy and whatnot, but I won't ramble about that too much in this video, I don't think. I'm happy to nerd out about that sometime, but for now I'll just stick to the logistics of how to use this stuff. Anyway, I think I'm going to leave it there. From here, I think if you have a need that you are curious about, hey, is there a JavaScript library that does this for me? Now you know the tools that you can use to answer that question. All right, I'll see you in the next video for P5, where I'm going to ramble about my favorite JavaScript library, but for now I'm going to leave it there. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.